Hey, I'm Hunter from SkillThrive, and in this video, you're going to learn the easiest way to authenticate a React or Gatsby app using Auth0 in the React Use Auth package. So we're going to get started here in CodeSandbox.io in order to create our React app. Now I'm actually going to be using Gatsby in order to create our React app, just because it's real easy to get started. And what we want to do is come over to Create Sandbox and come down to Explore Templates, and I'm going to search for Gatsby Starter Blog. This one here, go ahead and select that. This is going to bring us to the template page. So what we need to do is click on Fork in order to create this in our own sandbox. Feel free to change the name. I'm just going to keep it as is. And then it's going to build our Gatsby site for us. So while this is building, I'm going to come over and talk about the authentication service that I'm going to be using in this tutorial. Now, at the time of recording this, the React Use Auth package, which we're going to get to in just a second, only supports Auth0. Now, I actually use Auth0 on skillthrive.com, and I can't recommend it enough. There's a ton of features, and it also just makes authentication secure and really easy. And they also have a really generous free tier. It's 7,000 free active users. You can have the option to have passwordless login and also to social identity providers, as well as some other useful things. But it does, it's worth mentioning that it can get expensive if you have a ton of users signing into your site. So I just wanted to mention, you can see here, if you have 50,000 monthly sign-ins, it can cost you a lot of money. But hopefully with 50,000 active users each month, you're making some money off of these people, which is going to make it totally worth the price in the long run. So just figured I wanted to mention that. And now what we need to do is go ahead and sign up for Auth0. Now, I actually already have an account, so I'm going to click on Login and log in with Google. And then we can go ahead and just log into our account here. All right, so your dashboard may look different. I'm not completely sure, but mine already has this default app, which you should have as well. And what I'm gonna do is just go ahead and create a new application here and just call this SkillThrive tutorial. And then I'm gonna select single page web application and then click create. And now we have this new, new application we can start using for authentication. Now, this really doesn't matter. This is just going to, if I select this, it's going to tell me something, a quick start guide. So feel free to go over this, but this setup is really simple. All right, so let's come back over to CodeSandbox to see if our project is completed, which it is. And now what we need to do is install the React Use Auth package here. So let's come over to CodeSandbox. And in order to add dependencies here in CodeSandbox, we're just come down here and click on Add Dependency. And then you can search for the one you need. So React Use Auth, this one by Swizek. Click on that, and then it's going to add that as a dependency in our project. So let's come over here to this NPM and just read about setting everything up. So in this tutorial, he actually is using Gatsby as well. And you can see here that he's adding this code to the Gatsby browser.js, and we also need to add it to the Gatsby SSR file. So let's come back into CodeSandbox here. If we look at this, you can see that there's a Gatsby browser file, but there's not an SSR file. So let's go ahead and come up here and click on this file to create a new one and say Gatsby ssr.js. Then let's come back into here and just copy this code. Come into our browser, open that up. Come down below this. I'm not really sure why these are being imported, but it's from the template, so I'm just going to keep them there. But you can see that we're importing React. We're importing Navigate from Gatsby, which handles routing. And then we're also importing this Auth Provider from this package that we just installed. In this Auth Provider, we pass in a couple values here, Navigate. So we're saying, hey, Navigate from Gatsby is handling routing. And then we need to pass in our Auth0 domain and our Auth0 client ID, which we can get from Auth0. And then that's just going to be wrapped around our app. So then we can just refer to this in order to pass in the props here for our user, read them, and use them throughout our app once they're authenticated. But let's go ahead and set up this these two values here. So we'll need to come back to Auth0 here. and come into settings, I believe. Here's our domain. So let's just go ahead and copy this. We can paste that right here. Come back and we need to copy the client ID. And then paste that in. Then let's go ahead and just copy all of this here. And then paste the same thing into our SSR file. And then go ahead and save both of those files. Let's go ahead and refresh this, see if we get rid of that error here. So we're getting an error here. I'm not sure why that. Let's make sure we wrap that. Close that off. There we go. Make sure we don't have that same issue here. Okay, I just forgot to copy and paste that. All right, so now that we have that set up, let's come back to our documentation here. And the next step is to create a callback page. And what this is going to do is after we go ahead and authenticate in Auth 0, it's going to send us back to this callback page, which is going to call the handle authentication method from the use auth, which is coming from the React Use Auth package that we just installed. And once that's done, it's going to authenticate the user. It's going to create a cookie in local storage with that user's information, and then it's going to redirect us back to the home page by default. So what we need to do is first create this page. So let's come into our CodeSandbox, come up to Pages, and then click here to create a new file. And we'll call this auth0_callback.js. And then let's come back and copy this, paste it here. And you can see that we're importing React. We're also using the React hook use effect, which I have some videos I just recently published about and how this works. But I'll talk about that and how it works briefly as well. And we also are using importing use auth from this package. And we're also importing layout, which is a component. Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of that and also make sure we get rid of it here. And I'm just going to change this h1 to a p tag that says loading. And in this use effect, what this is going to do, it's going to run once the component mounts. Now, if you watch my previous videos, the way you can handle that in order to make sure that this only runs when it mounts is by passing this array argument as an empty array. Now, if this was dependent on some type of state value, that state, if it changed, would make this use effect run anytime that changed. But because there's nothing passed in here, it's only going to run once the component mounts. And once it is mounted, it's going to run this handle authentication, which is going to do just that. It's going to take the token that we got from Auth 0, it's going to authenticate it, and then it's going to create the user and pass us all that information so we can use it in our application. So once we save that, we now have our callback page ready to go. Now, what we do need to do as well in Auth 0 is we need to tell Auth 0 what URLs are allowed to use our authentication service and what callbacks are allowed to use it as well. Now, because we're doing this in CodeSandbox, they are going to generate this, this app URL for us. So let's come up here and just copy this. Come back into our application details, and we need to go ahead and paste it down here. So let's see, allowed callback URL. So I'm going to paste that in, then do auth0_callback. And we knew web origins is going to be the same thing, and the logout URLs is going to be that as well. And then we need to save that. All right, so let's come back to here and see what the next step is. And the next one is to say, enjoy using Auth 0, or, enjoy using use auth. Now, there is one thing we need to still do though, is to create a nav. So once someone clicks on a login button, they're going to be logged in. And once they click on a log out, they'll be logged out. And we also want to conditionally show something based on if a user is logged in or logged out, which we're going to do with the buttons. So let's come back to our project. Come up to the components here, and we're going to create a new component called nav. So we'll click here, create something called nav.js. And this component is going to be pretty simple. First thing it's going to do is going to import React. Then it's going to import the use auth from that package that we installed earlier. So use auth from the React Use Auth package. Then we'll create a function-based components, call that nav. And in here, we're going to return a nav here in HTML. Let's go ahead and pass in some styling here. So we'll do style. We'll add a margin bottom of 20 pixels. Okay, so in here, I'm just going to have two buttons. So button. This one's going to be login. And the next one is going to be log out. So let's go ahead and save that. And we need to go ahead and export this as well. So export default nav. And we also need to go ahead and call this use auth up here. So we'll create a constant where we'll destructure the methods we need. So that's going to be isAuthenticated, login, and log out. And we're going to set that equal to use auth. All right, so now that we have the basics here of this component created, let's go ahead and import it in our layout component, which is going to make sure that it is visible on all the pages because we're wrapping all the pages with that nav component, or with that layout component rather. And in order to do that, we need to first come over to the layout component. Then we need to come down here where we want to use it, and we're going to use it right here above the header. So let's go ahead and just start writing out nav. And you can see here this says auto import, so we can do tab. And what that's going to do, if we scroll up, it's going to import the nav from that the section in our files that we just created. So let's go ahead and save that. And once this rebuilds, you can see now that we have this login and log out button. Now, right now, these buttons don't do anything. So let's come back to our nav. And on this first one, we want to do on click, and that's going to be an arrow function. And it's important that this is an arrow function because if it's not, that would run every time this component mounts. And we only want it to run once it's actually clicked on it. So all we need to call is login as a method here. And let's go ahead and copy this. And let's go ahead and click on, or excuse me, not click on, but let's go ahead and change this to log out. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. So nothing's going to change visually, but now once we click on this, it should call use auth so we can sign in. And then once we come back, we're going to be authenticated. So let's go ahead and test it out. Fingers crossed. Here we go. So that looks fine. I'm not really sure. Let's open this into a new tab and see if that fixes anything. Click on login. Okay, for some reason that worked. So now you can see we're getting this this little modal here from auth0 asking us if we can go ahead and if we trust this profile, which you're going to click on this to log in. There's our callback page, and boom, now we're logged in. So if we come in and inspect this page, come over to the components here, and this right here is a tool called React Components, just Chrome, and it's the React Developers tool. So that's the extension that I'm using here. So let's come back to this, come back into our components. If we scroll all the way to the top, we have this context provider, which has some props, which has a value of an object. And here you can see in the state that we now have an auth result, which has an access token, has the user as well. So you can see the email that I used to sign in, the nickname, my picture, my ID, all that stuff now is being passed into context. Really simple, right? So now what we want to do is briefly, I want to show you how you can show the login button when the user is logged out, and then the log out button when the user is logged in. And we do that using the isAuthenticated method from React Use Auth. So let's come back into our project here. And let's come back to our nav, which is where we have the login and logout buttons, and we need to use this isAuthenticated. And what we can do is down here, we can write a function that says isAuthenticated. So we're going to use this, it's going to call it, whatever it comes back, true or false, we want the opposite. So essentially what we're saying is the user is not authenticated. We're checking that. And if this comes back, what do we want to render? Well, we want to render the login button. So we'll copy this, cut it out, and then we will paste it here. So now let's go ahead and copy this one, paste it. Here we want to check if it's true, and if it's true, we want to allow the user to log out. So let's go ahead and paste that here. Actually, it's just easier just to change this to log out. Then change this. All right, let's save that. Let's come back into our app here and refresh it. You can see now, because we're logged in, we see the logout button. So let's go ahead and click on logout. Cool, so let's go ahead and check that context provider. And you can see that it says auth0, whoops, not auth0 state. So is authenticating is true, expires at null, object is empty. So that means we're not authenticated. Perfect. And if we log in, we can go ahead and log in. And if we check that again, and now we can see our token, or excuse me, our expiration time. We can see and also the user information. And there you go. Now you've set up authentication on this Gatsby site in just a matter of a couple minutes using the React Use Auth package and Auth0. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing, and be sure to check out our other design and coding tutorials on our YouTube channel and on skillthrive.com. Again, I'm Hunter from Skillthrive, and I'll see you in the next video.